Hello, my name is Monica Miller, and I am the Marketing and Promotions Coordinator at Caitlin Press. And I'm very excited to introduce you to Vera Maloff and celebrate her book launch today. Caitlin Press is an independent Canadian publisher located on the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia. We publish culturally significant books, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Caitlin Press is also home of Dagger Editions, which is an imprint for the voices of queer women-identifying writers. I'm just going to start out with a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of introductions, and then I will let Vera and our host, Anne DeGrace, take it away. I'd really like to thank Elephant Mountain Literary Festival for co-presenting the launch online with us. And I'd like to acknowledge the support that Caitlin Press receives from the Government of Canada and the British Columbia Arts Council as a small independent publisher. Even in COVID times, it's even more vital for us. So although this event is virtual and we're joining you from a few different places in British Columbia, and you're joining us from all over the world, please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. The event is virtual, but we are living on the land of Indigenous peoples, and we'd like to acknowledge the places that we are. So Caitlin Press is located in Half Moon Bay on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Seashelt, Sleamon, and Klahoose First Nations. I work virtually from Vancouver, which is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And Vera and Anne are joining us from the West Kootenay region, which is the traditional territory of the Tunaka Sayulks and the Sinaikets people. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. And their region is also home to the Métis and many diverse Indigenous persons. So just a little bit about how to use Crowdcast. So many of you have found the chat, and I'll be in there for the majority of the event. So if you have questions about how things are working or what to do, feel free to ask there. If you want to ask Vera or a question for the audience question portion, down on the bottom, there's a tab that says Ask a Question. You can put it in there, and other people can actually upvote the question. So if you check out the Ask a Question tab and see someone's already asked the question, this burning desire that you want that answer, you can upvote it as well. And so when Anne and Vera do the question and answer section, they'll see that, 5-7 people really need to know the answer to this. There's also a button down here for more info / buy the book. That'll take you to Caitlin Press's website. We do ship books across Canada, but we also really encourage you to support your local independent bookseller. In Nelson, that's Otter Books. And then in Vancouver, I really like Iron Dog Books and Massey Books, which are both Indigenous owned. If you don't know who your local independent bookseller is, feel free to ask in the chat and I'll try and help out, find out who your local bookseller is. And yeah, that's really all the housekeeping. We are recording the event, so we'll send out a note later if you want to send it to someone else, or if you want to rewatch, or maybe you can only stay for a portion of it. So we are recording it. So I'd now like to introduce Vera Maloff and our host, Anne DeGrace. So Vera Maloff was born into a Doukhobor family in the Kootenay Valley of British Columbia. After retiring from a career in teaching, Vera began to record family stories passed down from generations. Her essays have been published in Iskra, the West Kootenay Journal, and the New Orphic Review. Vera lives with her partner Steve in the community of Shore Acres on the Slocan River, where she continues the family traditions of gardening, singing in Doukhobor community choirs, and participating in peace gatherings and cooking groups. And our host, Anne DeGrace, is the author of 4 novels, an illustrator of several books for children, a longtime freelancer for newspapers and magazines, and a volunteer writer-editor for many nonprofit organizations. She's been a consultant on independent book publications, and after retiring from a 32-year career at the Nelson Public Library, she recently started her own micro-publisher called Seraph Press. She works as a mentor and editor for writers working in fiction and nonfiction, and she loves it. So before Anne and Vera dig deep into this, I know that Vera would like to introduce us to someone very special. So I am going to bring her up on screen now. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Bye, Monica. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Monica. Thank you for coming to hear me. I'm just going to start. I'm going to start by reading the first chapter, Tenacity. And with Mother's 100 years old today, she definitely has tenacity. Mother is the keeper of the family history. Her cousins ask, Lisa, how come we didn't know that our father was born in Canada? Her sisters inquire, why did grandparents live in Oregon and California and where? Her answer to me is, when they were young, they were not interested in family history, but great-grandmother Elisaveta and I were close. I listened to her stories as I watched her bake bread and worked in the garden beside her. There are dark stories that Mother keeps close to her heart. She's now the only elder who can tell me about the cabin where grandfather served his house arrest during the Second World War and find it. So one day we take a trip out there, and this is what she tells me about that Blewett. Grandfather was only 40 when he lived in Blewett, but from the pictures of the time, he is white-haired and thin. Mother is the only one that will talk about those years of growing up with her father, Pete Maloff, of his campaign for peace and resistance to registration during the Second World War. Although the way her lips tighten when she speaks, I recognize that she holds some memories back. Being a writer, I prod, insist, ask for details, and for the family history, what she tells me, it's fascinating. But for my mother, the tension of her whole body tells me these memories hold pain. Some things I tried to forget. When I asked my aunts about what happened in those years, they said, better it's all buried. Aunt Luba's recollection of rowing across the Kootenai River to Blewett, where her father was intense, but she too changes the topic when I ask for details. My Aunt Nadia, who's now passed away, told me I was walking home with my friends one day and passed a police car. I see someone waving to me from the back seat of the car. I look closer. It's my dad. She closed her eyes tightly in effort to make the vision go away. I don't want to remember the past. I'm afraid of police and police cars to this day. Ask someone else. But they're the ones that lived through this story. So through my mother's stories and the reluctant recollections of my aunts, through the family photo albums and newspaper articles of the time, I have a story of growing up in the Maloff household when grandfather was active in a peace movement from the 1920s to the 1960s. When I hear a verification of her stories, I am delighted and a chill goes down my spine. But some of what I am told is hard to verify and accept as true. For one, a Doukhobor friend, Peter Sukaveyev, whose father spent time in the penitentiary with my grandfather, tells me, we visited the site of the BC penitentiary when it was being torn down. The friend I was with showed me the solitary confinement cells. He told me, your grandfather was hung upside down by his feet in one of those cells. Now in 2020, in Canada, I find this hard to believe. But what might have happened in a BC penitentiary cell in 1932?
Wow. Thank you for that reading, Vera. It was beautiful. First, I'd like to begin by congratulating you on this book. You know, I was saying as you were fumbling with all of the technology, Monica and I were talking about how privileged I feel to have been along with you on this journey, and how wonderful it is to see this book in print. And I'll just hold it up again for those that haven't seen it yet. It is a beautiful book, just a beautiful book, and it's beautiful to read. And so I want to congratulate you on your insight and your writing skill, and also on your tenacity, because you went after those stories and you did all that background, and you've put together something really remarkable. And Elizabeth, I would like to actually ask you: Are you happy? Are you happy to see your family stories in print in this new book by your daughter Vera?
That's a question for you, Mom. Are you happy to see these stories?
Yes, very happy.
That's great.
Glad and very thankful.
Great. I'm really happy too. So I knew what your answer was going to be, but I wanted to ask it anyway, just to hear it from you.
We're looking a little bit better about 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Vera, in the book you say that your mother didn't tell you many of these stories until recently, and I wondered if you would like to give us a little insight into why that might have been.
Well, Mother has always been one for looking forward. She says, you know, about the past is the main thing, as I survived, and she thinks of the future, and she always she says things will always get better. And I just, I'm astonished at her positive attitude. Even now, in her, being 100, she's still very positive. And people that come to work with her and everything, they're always thinking she's very welcoming and looks at the future. She doesn't really, she asks me the day-to-day things, not so much thinking back. But I was lucky when I retired. We started reading my grandfather's book in Russian. And then we started talking about the stories that she lived through at the same time too.
Okay, so you had that for context, which was probably a really good starting point, I imagine. And, you have, your grandfather was a really important person in your life as well. And could you tell me more about your grandfather and you and your relationship together?
Well, my grandfather was very passionate about peace and justice, and actually years before I was born, he was very active in the peace movement, the Doukhobor peace movement, and also in California, where he had many friends. He joined the peace movement here in Canada about 1929, and he led peace groups, marches. He led a march down Baker Street in Nelson. He led a group of Doukhobor, a choir actually, down to California. He led a group in Saskatchewan, where there are many Doukhobors. And he was arrested for these peaceful walks down Baker Street. For instance, when he walked down Baker Street with a group of people, there's a picture of that in the book. He was sent to Ocala for 6 months imprisonment. And then when in 1932, he was sent to the BC Penitentiary for 3 years. And again in 1940s, he was arrested. So all of those things had an effect on him and the family. But in terms of me, I really admired my grandfather, like many, many people did. And he's the one that loved books, and he introduced me to libraries. He introduced me to a UBC librarian that he was friends with. And he also introduced us to many people in the outside world, because he had connections with people from all over the world. For instance, he corresponded with Gandhi at one time, and then he corresponded with many other peace activists. And many came to visit him, and it's like he brought the world to us, and our horizons were broadened, from this narrow valley here in British Columbia to the world. And I really, I have to thank my grandfather for broadening our horizons for everybody.
It's interesting, you know, I'm sure it took a tremendous toll on the family to lose him for those years, and yet he strikes me as a man of tremendous conviction, and I'm going to guess that it's that conviction that drew so many people to him, you know, including Gandhi and others, and that ultimately brought the world to your door. So it's an interest. There's two sides to that. That's quite interesting. There's a loss and there's a gift as well, would you say?
Definitely. He had this passion that he had to follow. He felt he had to do his best to make this world a better place, and to do it by, he said, I know my mother one time asked him, why do we have to, you know, live so poorly? Why do you are not around so much? He says, I do it so that children could have their fathers, so the world would be a better place. So right. he was passionate that way.
Well, thank you for that and for that answer. And I actually think that it would be lovely to hear you read a little more, if you would.
Okay, I'm going to read a story from Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico is where the children and my grandmother were sent when grandfather protested on the streets of Nelson. He was sent to Ocala, and the children, together with a large group of families, were sent to Puerto Rico. And I'm just going to read a little bit about it. Very few people know about this time in life. This was in 1929. When we first arrived in Puerto Rico, I was wondering how we could possibly live here. Puerto Rico had been a large sawmill owned by the Doukhobor, but it was abandoned when the trees were cut down and a fire went through. There was a big old barn, a kitchen, some bunkhouses, but many were falling down and there were no doors or windows. That first night, everyone slept on the floor, but I think had been the eating area. But the men had a lot of work to do to make it livable. Puerto Rico is in a snowy, rainy area. It gets very cold there in the winter. At first, we were allowed visitors. Friends and relatives brought us food, and we greeted them with such joy. Then the police told us we couldn't have any more company. They set up a blockade on the road to the camp and stopped everyone. Somehow, my dad and Nick got through. He asked everyone he knew in Utashenya to give food, blankets, and clothing, or they'll all perish. He filled his truck with a huge load and came. Everyone was surprised he got through the police blockade. He teased us. There you are, you devils. Eat or you'll die like rats, he said. Mother said he liked to tease. He wasn't kind. He didn't stay long. He was afraid he wouldn't get back out. And I think that Babushka went with him because after he left, she was gone. Somehow, Mother says they got through that winter. And in the spring, the police allowed people to leave. Mama's brother, Ivan, came to pick him up, and we went home. There was still a lot of snow in Puerto Rico when we left, but in Thrums, there was planting time. Mama said we had to plant gardens so we would have food. Papa came home from Ocala later that spring. I often asked Papa why we had to have such a hard life, why he had to be outspoken all the time, why he had to go to jail. He told me we could have had an easier life, but he spoke out against war so there wouldn't be any cripples or orphans, so children would have to have their dads, and that there must be a better way.
You know, I'd never heard of this internment in Puerto Rico, which for those that don't know is south of Nelson, and is in a very dark valley. It had to have been a really difficult winter. How well do you think this is known in terms of Canadian history, or even in terms of Doukhobor history? Do people know about this really difficult time in the late 1920s?
Yeah, you know, even we did not know much about it, and the only way I found out about this, Mother told us, is when I actually found this picture in. It was my uncle hid this picture in behind a panel, electrical panel in his cabin, and he put it in this bag. And the reason we could figure out he hid it is that he was embarrassed at the time that my family was involved with the Sons of Freedom. But when I asked Mother about this picture, and then the story Puerto Rico came out, and that story won first prize in the literary festival, the Elephant Mountain Literary Festival. And that's what started my stories, telling all the stories about Mother's stories. So it was pretty important. And we didn't know much about that story either. So it was a surprise to us, and many Doukhobors don't know about it. And I think it's not in the Canadian history. It's not something that is well known at all.
Well, another good reason for this to be in print, and for people to start to learn about that history. I think it was the Kootenay Literary Competition that story won, if I remember correctly. And before I get on to the next question, just as an aside, in my own research into Japanese internment in New Denver and Slocan during the Second World War, I read that it was the Doukhobor people that brought vegetables to the Japanese that were interned in that first year. And I wonder if there was a bit of a collective memory about how hard that is. But there were Japanese internees that said if it were not for the Doukhobor farmers, they might not have survived that first winter. And I just wanted to share that because I think it's a really interesting connection between those two very difficult and rather shameful parts of our Canadian history. But I do see, Vera, that just a tremendous amount of research in this book. And that's tenacity, and it's also just good research chops. So, there's the memories your mother shared, but you've dug deeper, and I'm curious about where you, what were the sources of information that you used in researching the book? And also, as a sort of second part to this question, what was the biggest surprise for you that you came across in the course of research?
Touchstone's Archives in Nelson has an amazing collection of newspapers, and those old Nelson Daily News have such detailed stories about what happened. And so right from 1929, I was able to find the dates of this happened because Mother didn't remember the dates and everything. I was able to find the dates, exactly what the police did. And then I researched in Selkirk College, the newspapers from the Roslyn Miner, the Trail Times. And I was able to go to the UBC library, and they had quite a collection of grandfather's writing that that they bought from him at the time. So they have a box labeled Pete Maloff's correspondence. And then I was able to travel to some of the areas. For instance, I'm going to read next about the BC Girls Industrial School. And I went to the BC Girls Industrial School where it is now. And that helped me. I also read Kuzma Tarasov's book about that time. I read grandfather's book in Russian when he wrote about what his experiences were. And also Jonathan Kalmakov's blog, doukhobors.org. He has a lot of information about Doukhobors there also. Besides that, I read books on Siberia and where Doukhobors had lived. The other question was
sorry, I should have separated. And the other question was just, was there something that was a particular surprise to you that you really didn't know that you found out in the course of that research?
Well, reading the detailed information in the Nelson Daily News and the other newspapers, I was surprised at how the police went after just some simple things. Like, for instance, there was a protest in South Slocan, and I guess they were talking about 3 people had disrobed, and the police came with cars and trucks, and there were about 60 special constables hired to pick up these people. And so these peaceful people, they did start to disrobe, even though they hadn't. And anyone that had taken anything off, like a shirt or something, they put them. They started loading them into the trucks and the backs of trucks. And the information in that newspaper article says they used whips to get them onto there, even though they were, they did it voluntarily and everything. I was totally shocked at that and surprised.
Yeah, I was also, they used fire hoses on the protesters in downtown Nelson. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And you know, and these are peaceful protests, so it's hard to imagine that that they would have felt so threatened that they had to respond in this way. Yeah, it's eye-opening for me, and it will be eye-opening for anyone who reads this book, I believe. Do you have a little more you can read for us?
Okay, I could read, what I was planning to read is a little bit from the BC Girls Industrial School, where my mother was.
Mhm.
So this is when Pete Maloff, their father, was taken to BC Penitentiary, and my grandmother was taken to Piers Island, and this is what happened to the children. The matrons take Pietya, Luba, and Jonik and me from the Nelson jail, where Mama, Babushka, and Dedushka are, to the train station Sunday evening. There are many of us, over 100 girls and younger boys. The older boys were taken away a few days earlier. I barely have time to say goodbye to Mama. And when we go through the tall prison gate, I look back. She doesn't seem like my strong Mama at all, but small, clinging to the high wire fence around the prison yard. I want to call out, Mama, I'll look after everybody. Mama, don't cry. But the matrons bundle us away. We board 2 special coaches attached to the end of a regular CPR train. Mrs. Westman, the head matron, walks through the coaches and calls out our names from a list. She wears a white uniform, and when I look up at her, she is so tall and stern-looking, with her short hair and glasses, that I am scared of her. All the kids are running around excited, but I have to care for my brothers and sister. Johnny, Yetya, Luba, come, let's stay together. As the train heads west, we see the villages we know. Sharakers, Thrumps, Brilliant, Grand Forks, pass by the window. The train stops at these communities, and people get on and off, but we can only peer out the window and wonder what will happen to us. Into the night, the train travels, and in the morning, we wake and see strange rivers, towns, and mountains. The trip is long. We are tired and hungry when we finally reach our destination, Vancouver. When Petya's and Jonik's names are called, they climb down the train step, sullen looks on their faces, but obediently gather with the younger children. Luba clings to me and whispers, I'm scared, Lisa. I want Mama and Papa. When will they be here? Luba, I won't leave you. Here, hold my hand. But even as we step out of our coach, a matron firmly takes Luba's hand from me and places her in the lineup of children going to the orphanage. Luba reaches out her arms to me, but I'm also herded to another line and could do nothing but watch as tears stream down her face. My family has always been around me, and I always looked after my brothers and sisters, but now I am alone with strangers. More than 70 of us Doukhobor girls are assigned to the British Columbia Girls Industrial School. As we are driven up to the large white 3-story building, I see thick walls, barred windows, and a tower in the middle. I think we must be going to jail. We learn the girls on the first 2 floors are sentenced to live there because they've done something wrong, so that we don't mix with the juvenile delinquent girls. We climb the metal fire escape on the outside of the building, 3 stories up to get to the attic where our dorms are. Some of the girls complain the stairs are steep, and when it rains, they are slippery. But we are young, and it doesn't matter. I am never afraid of the height. Up and down the stairs, I always like it. I can see far, and I feel free.
In that chapter, Vera, you include a letter from government officials, a government official of some kind, letting Elizabeth's mother, now I'm trying to remember now exactly who it was written to, but it was basically saying where all the kids were at this point, you know, that in orphanage or in the industrial school or in foster care for the youngest one. And you posit in that chapter, you know, that it's a few months later, and is it possible that nobody knew where those kids were for all those months? That must have been devastating for everybody in the family, especially a baby. I can't imagine, you know, what that would be like. I'm not sure what my question is. I just think that particular chapter affected me quite deeply.
Yes, I almost cried too when I was reading it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was wondering when they would learn, because that letter to, they were taken away around May. That letter to actually their grandmother, Mary Hoodiccup, was dated August 22nd in 1932. So I'm wondering if they knew where the children were up until that time. And for instance, my mother did not know what was happening to her father, because at one point they had some visitors come to the industrial school, and those visitors told the girls there that their father, Elizabeth's father, had died. And actually that wasn't the case, but they had been treating him very, very poorly. They had beaten up in the jail, and somebody here in Thrums decided to put an announcement in a Russian workers' paper called Gudok, and they said that Pete Maloff had been beaten up in jail and had died. And that was his ploy to get some attention to what was happening.
Right, but when the news came to the kids in the industrial school, to Elizabeth, she took it as truth, and that had to be devastating for her too.
Yes, she was totally devastated. And the matron at the time found out quickly that wasn't the case. But I have to say that Mrs. Westman, I looked up a little bit about her, and Mother said of her, she said that she felt she was trying to do the best under the circumstances, and that she was trying to do a good job for all the girls in the school, even the girls that were sentenced to live there, that she was trying to get them some special training so that they could have jobs when they left there. And she said that when Mrs. Westman wasn't there, things didn't go as well, but she really helped to have a good atmosphere at the school as best they could, because there were hundreds of other children there that joined an already crowded school at that time.
Well, it's nice to hear that there was some kindness there. I know you also said that the Doukhobor kids were fed meat, that there was no cultural understanding, and that had to be difficult too, away from your family, and then so much that's
no, they did respond harshly to that one, because the girls refused to eat meat.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did is they had them stand outside in the sun and stand there all day until they would eat meat. And some of the older girls whose idea it was were sent downstairs to sort of like the
isolation.
Yeah. And it took a long time for them to settle that. Finally, I think what happened is the older girls started cooking, and that helped.
Yeah.
The food.
Yeah, a difficult time for sure. And, in that chapter, and actually throughout the whole book, there are some amazing photographs. And of course, this was all new to me, because I had been privileged to read some of the early chapters, but I hadn't seen the photos. In this chapter, we have photos of the school and the orphanage, and a summer camp that was aimed at assimilation, I think. And we all know about that. But tell us more about the photos of the book. Did you have those? I know you found some behind that water tank or something, but tell me about the photos.
Well, Walter, Mother's youngest brother, organized the photos into photo albums, luckily, because we know about stacks of photos in shoeboxes. And he had labeled the photos, and he had labeled the ones of the children in the orphanage. And those are very, very touching pictures. They must have been pictures that staff took of the children to send to the grandmother, for sure. That's who got them, maybe to the parents. But I don't think the parents were reassured by those pictures, because they were very, very sad. Mm. There's also photos taken of Pete Maloff walking down with a parade in behind him, a parade of people. And those photos are spectacular, and they were in the photo album, but we don't know who took them, because they were obviously professionally taken. And show the expressions on the men's faces, very determined looks that they were going to get the story out about how they did not want taxes to go to the war effort, how they did not want their children indoctrinated in patriotism. So, yeah. And there was, trying to think of the other photo besides the one I found.
Sorry, there was just a quad going by. Shut the window.
Good thing it's not my dog barking.
That can happen anytime here too. Anyway, sorry, we digress, everybody. Did you have more to say, or
about the photos? Well, yeah, probably just have a look at them. They're really amazing, and I think they really add to the book. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think in this case, that is definitely the case. There's pictures of some wedding pictures, and so there are some positives and some happier stories in this book also. It's not all about incarceration.
No, there's some beautiful lighter pieces, getting Uncle Bill married, and there's some, there definitely is, and I won't go into all of them. I think people just need to buy the book, which is a good segue into this question, which is, in the acknowledgements, you say that a community of people fostered and brought to light this book, and I'm wondering if you can expand on that community a little bit.
It was amazing when I started to write these stories. Just people came and helped out. I first of all started writing in a learning in a retirement group that was started by Margaret Hornby, and I really have to thank her for organizing this. And then through that, one of the stories in that I submitted to the literary contest. It won the Puerto Rico. It won the contest. And then my writing groups, the uphill writing group with Brian Dion and Ross Claddy and Diana Cole, they really helped me to hone my writing. They actually taught me some writing skills as I went on. I think I worked with them for about 5 years. And of course, my amazing editor, Andy Grace, held my hand throughout throughout the process. She was wonderful. And even when I started to get the pictures into the book, people volunteered and got the pictures digitized. John Kalmika, Pierre Paulkin. Yeah, it was amazing. Just people volunteered to help. So thank you to everybody.
I think everyone just really, really wanted to see this book out, and as it should be. So I'm really pleased to see that people came together. But I have to say I'm not surprised. It's a great book. So I think it's time to turn it over to questions for the audience. And I see one question there, but I just want to remind people that you can click on that Ask a Question on the bottom of your screen, and if you've got one, and I have some extra questions as well if we have time. But for now, the question is, your grandfather was a very active man. How much time were you able to spend with him?
My grandfather, well, he actually passed away shortly after I got married. He spoke at my wedding. I was only 20. He spoke at my wedding, and then he passed away just about 2 weeks later on a trip down to California to visit his friend, Dr. Bernard Jensen. But those 20 years I spent with him were, well, grandfather was very influential in many people's lives. He was warm and kind, and it influenced my whole life. And I'm sure that of my brothers and sisters and our whole family were just, it brought to us an outside world of people, and his passion just became our passion in many ways.
It sounds like he had a great number of fans. He also had, he also came into conflict with people as well, right? He was drawn to the Sons of Freedom for their convictions, and also came into conflict with them when he disagreed with some of their actions.
he supported their peace movement until they started to do some acts of violence. And then he totally dropped that. And they actually, some, and very few, I'm sure, tried to burn down the family home. So it was a very stressful time for the whole family too. I'm sure these were not the majority. There was probably a few people that wanted him to stay with them and stay with the Sons of Freedom movement. And the way to intimidate him was to start to burn his home. And that affected for instance, my Aunt Luba saw the house being lit on fire. Everyone else was sleeping inside. She was coming home late at night, and she went and woke everybody up in the house. And she said that she started pulling couches and beds and furniture out of the house. She doesn't even know how she did this. I do have to say, this isn't something that my aunts and my mother told us much about. It was something that they kept quiet, and they forgave. They didn't have any kind of they didn't harbor any kind of what's the word, bad feelings towards people. They forgave people. They told the story honestly, without a lot of anger. They were quite accepting of what happened and willing to tell their history,
which is generous, because that had to be a really difficult time as well. So I have another question here, and that is a question about sort of what the Doukhobor community is like today. I mean, those were very tumultuous times. How are things now?
Well, we're involved with the Doukhobor community now. We participate in the choirs, the peace. There are a lot of peace gatherings still, and the community, of course, is smaller. It's more of an elderly community, but I think there are a lot of people that still believe strongly in the Doukhobor message of everyone having like a spirit of God inside them. So that is why one reason that not to kill people. They still believe that vegetarianism is the way to go, and it'll help our planet at this time when they say that some of the reasons for the warming of the planet is the animals. So there are younger people that are standing up and supporting the Doukhobors now. So I really appreciate. I have to say that one person that just did join this group of people that is starting to talk about it is what's her name? Ashley Shkurada, who's volunteered to help spread the word about the Doukhobors, and she was not even didn't grow up in the Doukhobor community. She is learning Russian now through a Russian speaker at home in Vancouver. So I really appreciate her effort.
Great. I have a few burning questions here, and I don't know how much time we have left, but maybe Monica will type something into the chat and let me know. I wanted to ask you about the title, as well as about the cover photo, which is gorgeous. If you could just speak a little bit about that, that would be terrific.
Our title, I wonder if it's like that. Our Backs Warmed by the Sun. It's from one of the stories that I tell in the book, and it's a story about marriage. And it's a story that mother's grandmother told her when she was married in Georgia. She was married very young, 12 years old. And these stories, as they were picking strawberries together in Papa's farm here in Thrums, they shared these stories. And I wrote, I remember picking strawberries also, and I remember kneeling over and picking the strawberries, and your back would get nice and warm. And that's why I said our backs warmed in the sun, by the sun. And I picked that up, and from one of the stories it said, "Oh, that'd be a great title." And I thought, "Oh, yes, that would be. It has so many different kinds of meanings to it." So I really appreciate Anne for making that suggestion.
I wasn't setting you up to say that, but I have to say that when I was reading it, Vera, there's a lot of really beautiful lines in this book, and that one stood out for me, and in part because it kind of embodies that toil and peaceful life thing, that the concept that the Doukhobor people embrace. It was beautiful and it was evocative, and I'm so glad that you chose it. And this photo of two women and their flowers, and they're to speak a little bit about that.
So I found this photo in Touchstone's archives. I had been there many times, looking through the newspapers of the time, and then just before COVID shut down Touchstones, I phoned the archivist at that time, was John Paul, and asked if I could come to look at the picture files they have on Doukhobors. And so he met me, and we looked through the Doukhobor life files, and I found this picture of my mother and grandmother preparing for market. They didn't know who was in the photo, who had taken it, but I remembered it right away. I remembered that dress that mother sewed, and that apron that grandmother always wore when she was preparing for market. So it was like serendipity. I said, this would be wonderful for the cover. And it felt like it was special just to find it just then when I was looking for a cover picture.
It is absolutely perfect. And it's timeless too. It's a wonderful thing. And, your family is still a pretty agrarian family, and you have a strong connection to the land. And you're all gardeners. So how perfect is that? I have a final question for you, and I know that you have some wrap-up comments that you want to make. If you could sum up what you learned from writing this book, what would it be? What's the thing that you felt that you learned or that you took away from this very long and very intense and sometimes very emotional journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, I really got to know the life that my mother and her family lived, and I really I felt their emotions as I wrote the stories, and felt what they lived through and what a hard life it was for them. And yet at the same time, they came out of it positive. Like even my grandfather, he went through, some horrible times when he was in jail. He was beaten up badly, but he never ever thought of himself as someone that was a jailbird. He thought of himself as a worker for peace, and just that positive attitude from all of them. I really admired and respected, and have to thank my mother for telling me these stories. Thank my family for living through these, and for being there to raise us the way they did, because it was. I think what happened is that some of that stress did carry on in their lives, and so it did. It does show through the generations, but like Mother said, the important thing is that she got through it, and she is here today at 100, which is amazing. And she got congratulations from the Queen and from the Premier and from the Prime Minister. So it's a wonderful story in the end.
Well, I would like to thank you for writing the book, and I would like to thank Elizabeth for. I know it wasn't always easy to tell those stories, Elizabeth. I'm so glad that you did, because I think that this book is a gift to all of us. So congratulations on your birthday, and thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you, Vera, for writing the book. And thanks to Caitlin for inviting me along to ask you a few questions. It's certainly been my privilege, and I'll did you have a few things you wanted to say to wrap up, Vera?
No, just thank you for all the supporters. I see I have 106 people. Wow, thank you for coming out and helping me and Mom celebrate the launch of this book. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you, Caitlin, for taking this book on and publishing it. And
I apologize. There were some last-minute questions that came in. And I'm sorry, we're sort of wrapping up. Monica?
I was going to say, if you want to get to those, I'm happy for us to go over time because we did have some technical difficulties at the beginning. So,
are you okay with that, Vera? I'm sorry, I didn't see them come in. They were just sort of at the last minute there, but I can ask them now if you're. I know we just sort of felt like we were wrapping up, but they're good questions. Is it all right?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so well, one question was what thoughts Elizabeth has on the retelling of her father's story, and she did sort of answer that at the beginning a little bit. Happy that the book was published, I think.
What thoughts do you have for retelling your grandfather's story? What do you think about retelling your dad's story?
Yeah, I think it was very nice, very good.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that question. And someone just wanted you to introduce your mom again, and just to say how many were in the family. If you can just answer that, Vera, that'd be great.
This is my mother, Elizabeth Maloff. She is actually the oldest in the family. And maybe I could show a picture. I don't know if this is clear.
Oh, yes, please.
This is actually a picture taken probably just before grandfather was in the Nelson jail for protesting against the national registration that was for everybody. Mother is the oldest of the family, Elizabeth Maloff, and then and this is her mother, Lucia. This is Nada. This is Uncle Walter. And this is Uncle John. And John and Luba here are twins. And this is Uncle Pete. So amazing thing is that mother is the oldest, and she is the one that is left in the family. The rest have passed away. A couple of them just last year or so. So she says this picture makes her feel a bit sad because she's the only one left. But she has a lot of admirers still.
Well, she looked after her brothers and sisters, I know, a lot. A final question, and this is the final question, and it's a good question to wrap up with. I do see someone has asked how they can watch this recording in the future, and I think maybe Monica can speak to that. But the question is, how have you grown as a person over the course of this book? And I think that's a good place to leave it when you've answered that.
Well, I've learned a lot of new skills. I was a teacher, and I wrote report cards for the kids, but I learned to write. I've also met so many people outside the Doukhobor community, and that has really enriched me also, because I realized there are so many other people that are passionate about peace and passionate about God and having God in one's heart and one's body, and that they are willing to step up and help out with this book or with other things. For instance, I was really impressed with Jenny Barron, who had me share part of a story from the book with her peace and justice class at Selkirk College. And she's just another one of those people that is, like my grandfather, passionate about working for peace. And I think it's just expanded my horizons and learning new skills for sure. One of them is speaking. I'm used to speaking in front of children, like 7, 8, 9-year-olds, but in speaking in front of an audience is a skill that I'm learning.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vera. And Anne, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed listening to it, and thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us. If you're watching this after the fact as well, thank you for watching. Thank you to the Elephant Mountain Literary Festival for co-presenting this with us. And I would like to remind everyone to pick up a copy of the book. We encourage you to support your independent bookseller. We'll be sending an email after with a link to watch the video if you want to share it, rewatch it. Probably edit out the technical problems at the beginning. So thank you again for joining us on this lovely Sunday afternoon, or whatever time zone you may be in. And yeah, thank you so much, Vera, and to your family, to your mom, Elizabeth. It's really wonderful. This is truly a great book, and really speaks to the power of the Doukhobors, the Doukhobor community. So it's been my pleasure, and I'll sign off and say thank you very much from Caitlin Press. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Vera.
I'm very thankful that I met you.
Nice to meet you, Elizabeth.
Uh-huh.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.